I didn't expect dinner to feel like this. Not the usual laughter, not the polite clink of glasses, not the easy conversation that fills a room. And yet, the moment she sat down across from me, something shifted. Her presence, warm, deliberate, unassuming, made the air heavier, almost viscous. Her name is Marianne. She moves through a room like she's aware of every surface she could touch, every glance she might catch. Confident, yes, but with something quieter under it, a tremor of vulnerability she doesn't let anyone see unless she chooses to. I've only noticed because I'm paying attention. Always paying attention. I, in contrast, feel like I'm constantly trying not to be noticed. 23, still figuring out the weight of my own presence in a room, I watch her. Her hands, resting on the table, fingertips brushing the edge of the wine glass, thumb tracing the stem absent-mindedly. Her eyes, bright in the lamplight, occasionally flick to mine and hold for a fraction too long. She doesn't speak, not yet, but she communicates more in that pause than most people do in sentences. Dinner was meant to be casual, a small gathering with my girlfriend's family. But when Marianne slid into the seat beside me, closer than expected, I realized casual wasn't in the cards. The scrape of her chair against the tile made my stomach twist, not from discomfort, but anticipation. She laughed softly at something across the table, and I leaned slightly toward her, drawn by a gravity I didn't understand. I caught a faint whiff of her perfume, a soft, floral warmth, and for a second, it seemed to cling to my skin. My hand brushed hers as I reached for my water glass. I pulled back immediately, embarrassed, but she didn't recoil. She kept her hand there, a whisper of contact that lingered longer than necessary, and I felt my pulse quicken. She spoke then, her voice low, almost playful. "Do you always stare at people like that?" There was no accusation, only curiosity, a challenge hidden beneath the softness. I choked on my words, cleared my throat, and said something stupid about the soup, trying not to let my gaze betray me. Every now and then, our knees brushed under the table. A casual accident, or maybe not. I didn't move, neither did she. It was a silent conversation, a test neither of us admitted we were having. My hand twitched near hers again, just a fraction of an inch closer than before. She didn't flinch. The room grew quieter as the conversation drifted elsewhere. I could hear only the scrape of utensils, the low hum of the refrigerator, the distant car horn outside. It was intimate in a way that made me dizzy. Her hair fell forward slightly, brushing my arm. I swallowed hard, aware of every inch between us. And then, it happened. Her foot nudged mine. Just a touch at first, light, casual, or maybe testing. My heart leapt in a way I couldn't control. I didn't pull away immediately. I felt her glance flick down at our shoes for a heartbeat, then up at me, and it held. Not challenging, not teasing, just noticing. I wanted to say something, anything, but the words stuck somewhere between my throat and my mind. She smiled faintly, a subtle tilt of her lips that promised nothing and everything at once. I couldn't tell if it was intentional, or if I was imagining it. Then the front door clicked. A voice, someone arriving, someone breaking the fragile bubble we had created. Marianne's eyes snapped to the door, her expression shifting in a blink. And just like that, the moment hung in the air, unresolved, like a note left on the piano, vibrating long after the keys have been pressed. The arrival at the door broke our fragile cocoon, but it didn't erase it. Marianne's gaze lingered on me a fraction longer than necessary before she straightened, smoothing her skirt over her knees as if she had just realized how close we had been. I wanted to say something, anything, but the words lodged in my throat. I'd always been cautious with women older than me, not because I disliked them, but because I had a tendency to read too much into fleeting glances and faint touches. At 23, I'd only ever known the quick crushes, the easy heartbreaks, the sort of fleeting intimacy that felt more like a scratch than a burn. But Marianne was different. She carried history in the way she moved, in the way her hands paused mid-gesture like she was measuring herself against an invisible standard. I wanted to trace those pauses, learn the stories they hinted at. She cleared her throat, returning to the conversation, but I noticed the subtle tension in her shoulders, the way her fingers lingered near the rim of her wine glass a moment too long. Her husband had passed 10 years ago, she'd once casually mentioned, a fleeting detail in a sentence about something else entirely. It wasn't a sob story, but it was enough to make me wonder how much she'd carried alone, how much she had buried behind polite smiles. And maybe that's what made me reckless. Because when someone carries that weight and still moves with such deliberate grace, it draws you in. It tugs at something unnameable in your chest, the part that wants to see, to hold, to be trusted. I wanted to be trusted by her. But I also knew the danger. She was my girlfriend's sister, elegant, untouchable in a way that was deliberately intimidating. Age, perception, propriety, it was all stacked against us. Still, our interactions continued to defy caution. At one point, she leaned forward slightly to reach for the bread, her elbow brushing my forearm. I flinched, a little too obviously, but she didn't pull back. Instead, she lingered, her eyes catching mine for just a heartbeat before she turned her gaze back to the table. My pulse hitched without me meaning it to. I told myself it was nothing, just a coincidence, but my body disagreed. Later, when we moved to the living room for coffee, she settled onto the sofa with a casual ease that made it impossible for me to keep my distance. I sank into the chair opposite her, pretending to check my phone, though I was acutely aware of every millimeter that separated us. Her presence filled the space more than the furniture did. The faint scent of vanilla from her perfume swirled around me, and I realized I was leaning slightly toward her without realizing it. Her hand found the edge of the sofa near mine, intentionally or not, I couldn't tell, and she rested it there, thumb brushing the fabric over and over. I imagined what it would feel like if it rested on my hand instead. She caught me staring, just for a second, and smiled faintly, a tilt that was almost shy but still confident. And then she withdrew, smoothing her skirt again, as if she had just remembered the invisible line we weren't supposed to cross. It was a dance neither of us were allowed to name. I wanted to ask if she felt it too, the heat and the quiet, the pull and the pauses, but something in her restrained manner told me that speaking would ruin it. And yet, in that restraint, there was intimacy. In the half-touch, the glance that held too long, the breath that drifted past my cheek when she leaned in to pour coffee, we were talking in a language only we understood. I cleared my throat, laughing at something trivial the other said, and she tilted her head toward me, eyes softening in a way that made my chest tighten. I felt a flicker of courage, a temptation to reach out, to bridge the invisible space between us. But instead, I simply shifted slightly closer on my chair, and our knees brushed again, this time deliberate, and yet casual, and electric all at once. She didn't pull back, neither did I. And in that unspoken agreement, in that moment of quiet, charged acknowledgement, the air between us hummed. A connection I shouldn't have felt, and yet couldn't deny, settled like a pulse in my chest, waiting for the next move we dared to make. The living room had grown quiet. The hum of conversation from the dining area was a distant buzz, barely reaching us through the half-closed door. Marianne was perched on the sofa, knees bent, arms loosely folded. I sat opposite, pretending to read something on my phone, but the screen was blurry, the words meaningless. All I could focus on was her. Her hand brushed against mine again. This time, not by accident, I thought. My fingers twitched, almost reaching for hers, but I stopped. I didn't know if she wanted it, if it was safe, or if I was reading too much into a fleeting brush. "You're quiet," she said softly, voice low, almost conspiratorial. She leaned forward just a fraction, and my heart stuttered when the scent of her perfume drifted past me. "Do you always get lost in your thoughts like this?" I swallowed, heat rising to my ears. "Sometimes," I managed. "Depends what I'm thinking about." My voice cracked slightly, betraying more than I intended. She tilted her head, eyes narrowing just enough to make me feel exposed. A pause hung between us. My knee brushed hers. She didn't pull back. My hand moved slightly closer to the edge of the sofa. She shifted too, reducing the gap almost imperceptibly. Then my phone buzzed. A text from my girlfriend lit the screen, "Heading back soon. Don't be late." I glanced at it, heart hammering. Marianne's gaze followed mine. She smirked faintly, but there was something unreadable there, understanding, amusement, maybe even warning. I locked the phone and tried to focus on something else. Anything else. But Marianne leaned just a fraction closer, and I felt the warmth of her arm near mine. Her hair brushed my shoulder as she reached for a mug, and I froze. Time stretched, heartbeat pounding, every tiny sound magnified, the scrape of her fingers against the cup, the soft sigh she didn't mean for anyone to hear. I wanted to lean in, just an inch, close enough to feel her breath, close enough to, I didn't even know. But guilt clenched my chest. The age difference, the fact she was my girlfriend's sister, the careful life we were all supposed to live. Every rational thought screamed don't. Yet every instinct told me to ignore that, to just see, to just feel. Her eyes flicked to mine, and then back to the mug. And then, she leaned in slightly again, a whisper of movement that brought our faces dangerously close. I could smell her, see the faint tremble in her lower lip, feel the pulse in her neck. I wanted to close the gap, to brush her hair back, to tell her I couldn't stop thinking about her, to risk everything for one moment. But at the exact moment my brain and body almost gave in, the hallway light flickered, and a voice called from the kitchen, "Hey, Did you grab the dessert? We both jerked back almost simultaneously, pulling apart just enough to seem casual. She adjusted her posture, smoothing the fabric of her skirt like nothing had happened. My chest heaved, and I noticed her hand lingering a fraction too long on her mug before she set it down. We exchanged a look, half apology, half acknowledgement, fully electric. And then she moved closer again, almost without thinking, almost like the universe was daring us. Our knees touched under the table again, slightly firmer this time. My fingers twitched toward hers, and she didn't withdraw. I caught my breath. So did she. And even as every rational part of me screamed to stop, we remained there, inches apart, holding a tension that was impossibly fragile and impossibly charged. One wrong move, one word, and it would shatter. But neither of us moved. We were closer than ever. And yet, still resisting. I didn't realize how much I'd been holding myself back until I couldn't anymore. The room felt smaller, warmer, as if the air itself had condensed around her. Marianne had shifted on the sofa again, leaning slightly toward me, not enough to be improper, but enough that the distance between us disappeared in the subtlest ways. Her hand rested briefly on the arm of the chair closest to mine, brushing against my sleeve. A shiver ran down my spine I couldn't hide. I wanted to move it, to let my fingers linger over hers, but my rational mind screamed against it. She was my girlfriend's sister. The thought of betrayal clawed at me, yet it was drowned out by something far stronger, a need to feel her, just once, fully, without hesitation. She caught me staring, caught me in the act, and instead of pulling away, she held my gaze. Her lips parted slightly, like she was weighing whether to say something or let the tension speak for us. I could see the faint tremor in her fingers, the catch in her breath. She was trying not to let herself feel it either. And yet, she was leaning closer. You always notice things, don't you? She murmured. Her voice was low, intimate, teasing, and it made my pulse spike. I swallowed, trying to form words, but all I could manage was a whisper, I can't help it. Her hand twitched toward her hair, and before I could stop myself, I reached out. Fingers brushed against hers, then slid almost accidentally into her hair, tucking a stray strand behind her ear. Her skin was soft, the warmth of her cheek just inches from mine. My heart pounded so loud I was sure she could hear it. I shouldn't, I began, but the words caught in my throat as her breath feathered across my jaw. The proximity of her, the way her shoulder brushed mine, the faint perfume that had settled in my senses, it all pressed down on me like gravity. Her eyes flickered downward for a moment, then back to mine, holding a vulnerability I hadn't seen before. I shouldn't either, she whispered, voice trembling just slightly, betraying the calm mask she tried to maintain. We paused. The world beyond that sofa ceased to exist. I could feel her heartbeat in my chest, a rapid, unsteady drum that matched my own. The faint brush of our arms, the warmth of her shoulder leaning toward me, the tiny shiver that ran along her spine when our knees touched, it was almost unbearable. I think about you, I admitted, the words spilling before I could stop myself. The confession wasn't full, not in detail, but it was enough. Enough to crack the invisible wall between us. Her eyes widened, but she didn't pull back. Instead, she leaned closer, just a fraction, the warmth of her body now a tangible force against mine. I think about you too, she murmured, almost inaudible, almost stolen, but fully meant. We were there, inches apart. My hand rested against her arm, hovering like a question mark. My lips itched to meet hers. Her gaze flicked to mine, then to my mouth, then back. Time slowed. The unspoken desire hung thick, impossible to ignore. And then, just as my pulse hit a fever pitch, as if the universe itself was holding its breath, there was a sudden knock at the door. Our heads jerked toward the sound. A sharp, intruding reality that could ruin everything, or maybe push it further. But in that heartbeat, that pause, we were closer than ever. The question remained, would we stop, or would we finally cross the line? The knock at the door echoed longer than necessary, and for a moment, the room seemed to shrink even further. Marianne's shoulder brushed mine as she shifted, a subtle tremor running through her. I swallowed hard, heart still racing from the near confession that hung between us like smoke. Sorry to interrupt, came my girlfriend's voice, bright and casual, but with a hint of curiosity. I forgot my phone in the kitchen. She stepped into the living room, eyes scanning the space, unaware of the invisible charge crackling in the air. Marianne stiffened, her fingers gripping the edge of the sofa slightly tighter, and I realized just how close we had been. I wanted to reach out again, to anchor the moment before it evaporated, but then my phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. I saw you too. Don't think I didn't notice. I froze. The blood drained from my face, but Marianne's eyes widened almost imperceptibly. She leaned back, pressing her palm against her chest as if the weight of the message landed there first. My fingers trembled slightly on the arm of the chair. The air felt thick, suffocating, yet electric. I don't understand, I muttered, trying to steady my voice, but it sounded hollow even to me. Marianne glanced at me, and then at the door, and back again. Her breath hitched. She stepped slightly closer to me, her shoulder brushing mine in a small, inadvertent reassurance. "It's nothing," she said, but her voice trembled just enough to betray her calm. Her eyes held mine too long, and I saw something there I hadn't before: fear and longing, tangled together in a knot I couldn't untangle. The text lingered in my mind. Someone had seen us, or thought they had. Maybe it was a neighbor, maybe a cousin dropping by. The uncertainty made the room feel smaller, hotter. Every movement felt magnified: the soft brush of our knees under the table, the tremble in her hand as she tucked her hair behind her ear, the way I kept leaning toward her despite every instinct screaming step back. "You're close," I whispered, barely audible. My throat was dry, my pulse hammering. "I can feel you." She didn't respond immediately. Instead, she shifted again, her hand sliding just a fraction along the sofa cushion until it hovered near mine. A breath passed between us, slow, trembling, hesitant. The electricity in that silence was almost unbearable. "I didn't think that anyone would notice," she finally murmured, voice low, hesitant. I try to keep it together." "I know," I said, voice breaking slightly, because the truth was heavier than the silence. "Me too. But it's impossible to ignore." My hand twitched near hers, aching to reach out, to cross the last millimeter between safety and surrender. Her eyes flicked toward the doorway, then back to mine. The tension in her posture, the slight tremor in her fingers, the way she leaned ever so subtly toward me, it was all a confession without words. And I wanted to respond, to close the gap, to finally give in to everything I had been holding back. But fear lingered, sharp and biting. If anyone really had seen us, if anyone else knew, the consequences could be immediate. And yet, that fear only made the magnetic pull stronger. I wanted her closer, wanted her to lean into me despite it all, even as the rational part of my mind screamed stop. Marianne's gaze softened, almost pleading, almost daring. My fingers twitched again, hovering over the space where hers would meet mine. The room seemed to shrink even further. Our knees brushed, deliberate and electric, and the tension was unbearable, thick with everything we hadn't said. She leaned toward me again, just a whisper of movement, enough that our faces were almost touching. My voice was low, trembling. "I can't hold back anymore." And in that suspended moment, the world narrowed to the space between us. 1 second, 1 breath, 1 heartbeat could change everything. Would we stop, or finally cross the line? The room felt smaller than ever, thick with the weight of every stolen glance, every half-touch, every pause that had stretched between us for weeks. Marianne's shoulder brushed mine again, lighter than before, but it was enough. My pulse slammed in my ears. "I can't," I started, voice hoarse, but she cut me off with a breath that brushed against my jaw. "Shoo," she whispered, almost urgent, almost tender. Her hand hovered near mine, trembling, but she didn't pull away. My fingers itched to close the gap, to let that small brush become something more, but my chest tightened with fear, with guilt, with all the rules I was supposed to follow. Her eyes caught mine, full, unguarded, pleading in a way that made my knees go weak. She leaned slightly toward me, the faint warmth of her cheek near mine, the soft weight of her shoulder grazing me. Every instinct screamed to step back, to respect boundaries, but every other part of me, the part that had been awake and aching since the first dinner, screamed to lean in. "I don't want to stop," I admitted, voice low, almost a whisper. The words trembled, ragged with truth. "Even if I should." She didn't answer. She just leaned closer, a fraction, enough that the air between us seemed to vibrate. Her breath tickled my neck. The faint scent of her perfume wrapped around me, grounding and maddening all at once. I could feel her heartbeat through the space between us, rapid and uneven, matching mine. My hand moved without thought. It hovered near hers, brushing the edge of the sofa cushion, inching closer to her fingers. She didn't pull away. Instead, her hand twitched toward mine, almost like a question, almost like surrender. My lips were an inch from hers, and I could see the faint tremble of her lower lip. And then, clarity. All the guilt, the fear, the consequences, melted for just a heartbeat into something raw and undeniable. We couldn't stay in the space between almost and never. Not anymore. Her hand met mine finally, fingers interlacing almost instinctively. Our knees brushed again, firmer, deliberate. Her shoulder pressed lightly against mine, grounding, yet electric. I leaned just a fraction closer. So did she. The room held its breath with us. "I don't care," she whispered. "Not anymore." That was it. That line. That permission. That surrender. I closed the last millimeter, letting our foreheads touch first, just briefly, to steady myself, to anchor the moment. Her fingers tightened around mine, and in that grip, in that press of skin to skin, everything else, the rules, the fear, the world beyond the walls, fell away. We didn't rush. We didn't need to. The air itself seemed to hum between us, heavy with all the longing we'd carried. Every glance, every hesitant touch over the past weeks had led to this, messy, human, unpolished, and real. For a long moment, we just stayed like that, foreheads touching, breaths mingling, hands clasped, heartbeats echoing together. In that simple closeness, I understood her entirely, the way she carried herself, the small fractures she tried to hide, the quiet strength beneath it all. And she understood me, the way I noticed everything, the way I wanted more than I could say, the way desire could feel like danger. It was a choice we'd made without words. Desire over hesitation. Closeness over distance. Fear replaced by acknowledgement. When we finally parted just slightly, long enough to see each other's eyes clearly, there was no doubt. No more almosts. No more questions. We understood each other fully. And somehow, that made everything, and nothing, possible at the same time. The tension that had hovered between us for weeks finally settled, not with a dramatic explosion, but with something quieter, steadier. Marianne sat beside me on the sofa, our hands entwined, fingers curling together almost instinctively. The weight of hesitation, the fear of judgment, the ever-present rules, they all seemed distant now, like echoes from a life that didn't exist anymore. Her shoulder leaned into mine, light and warm, and I felt a calm wash over me that I hadn't thought possible. I could hear her breathing, even, slow and steady, and it synced with mine without effort. Our knees pressed together, firm yet casual, like a secret only we shared. It was intimate, but not urgent, sensual, but not frantic. "I still can't believe we're here," she murmured, voice soft, almost shy. Her hand squeezed mine gently. "After everything." "Neither can I admitted, leaning my forehead against hers. The contact was grounding, reassuring. I could feel the subtle tremble in her fingers, the faint warmth of her cheek against mine. "But I'm glad we are." She smiled, the kind of smile that carries relief, amusement, and longing all at once. "Me too." She rested her head lightly on my shoulder, as if she had always been meant to be there. The room felt full, not with noise, but with quiet satisfaction, the kind that comes when barriers dissolve and honesty fills the space. We didn't need words for long stretches. Just the small touches said everything. A thumb brushing across my knuckles, a hand curling around mine, the weight of her leaning closer, the gentle rise and fall of her breath against me. It wasn't rushed, wasn't frantic. It was deliberate, slow, human. "You know," she said after a while, voice low, teasing just enough to make me smile, "I was terrified of what might happen, of how it would feel." I chuckled softly, and her lips curved into a faint, satisfied grin. "It feels right." Her words were simple, but the conviction behind them wrapped around me tighter than any embrace. I tilted my head, brushing my lips briefly to her forehead, a soft, grounding kiss that didn't demand anything more than the moment itself. The rest of the world could wait. The age gap, the social perception, the lingering guilt, they were just shadows now, distant and meaningless. We had chosen each other, and in that choice, everything that had been tentative, confusing, or forbidden became clear and warm. We stayed like that for a long while, talking in whispers, sharing laughter, letting silences hang comfortably, letting the closeness grow without pressure. When we finally leaned back, hands still intertwined, I realized that the space between us, once charged, tense, impossible, had transformed into something safe, familiar, and intoxicatingly real. Marianne tilted her head toward me, her lips brushing against my temple. "We'll figure everything else out," she whispered. "Together." I nodded, feeling the truth of it in my chest, in the steady beat of our hearts, in the warmth of her hand in mine. "Together," I echoed. And for the first time in weeks, the tension was gone. All that remained was us, tangled, human, undeniable, and exactly where we were supposed to be. Point 3.